Hi, my name's Sue and this is Sue Marie P, and I'd like to welcome you to go over to suemariep.com and join my monthly newsletter and check out all my other recipes. But today it's almost Easter and I'm going to share my latest best ever hot cross bun. This time I've done it dairy free, no eggs, and I'm doing a little bit of choc chips, dark chocolate chips, cranberries and orange juice. So let's get started. First step you need to do is, before you mix all the dough, we need to warm some milk, which I've done already, and I'm using what's called pea milk. Sounds crazy, it's not green, it's a plant-based milk and it's really creamy. So I've already heated that up just so it's lukewarm to touch, and in there I'm going to add my fast dried yeast. So in here I've got 10 grams, which is about, I pack it with 1.5 packets. Don't know what I'm saying sometimes. And then I'm going to pop in some maple syrup, or you can use honey if vegan's not important, or you could swap it out and put just regular sugar. So 3 tablespoons. And even though I'm using the fast active yeast, it's not completely necessary to let this rest and make it bubble, but I'd like to, so then I can ensure that everything is active and going to work. So I just give that a little bit of a mix. And even though they don't have butter or eggs, I use a little bit of oil and they're surprisingly really light and fluffy. So already prepared, I've got white spelt flour, which is 4 cups, 525 grams. If you want to use a little bit of whole grain spelt flour, because I know there's many countries that you can't get white spelt, use that. If you want a finer, fluffier bun, just sift out some of the grain. So in there I'm going to add a teaspoon of salt, that's just fine salt. And I've got my spice mix I've already mixed up here. It's 2 teaspoons of cinnamon, half a teaspoon of ground cardamom and 1 teaspoon of mixed spice. But mix and match whatever kind of spices you like. You can add a little bit of nutmeg, ginger. So I like to just whisk that around. So I'm just going to hook that onto my stand mixer with the dough hook. If you don't have a stand mixer, you can do it with your hand, big wooden spoon, whatever works for you. I do this way because it only takes about 3 to 5 minutes to knead the dough. You just need a little bit longer, but just ensure that with spelt flour, you don't need to knead it as long as regular flour. Because the gluten fibers are shorter, it doesn't need to have that really stretchy, elastic kind of dough. So back on the dried fruit. If you don't want to use cranberries, you can swap out and use, I've got 100 grams here. You can use sultanas, currants, raisins, but if they are really dry, you might want to soak them in just a little bit of water, just enough to cover them overnight. Of course, the cranberries are really soft, and if you soak them in water, the colour tends to leach out a little bit. They don't need soaking. And for fun, instead of more fruit, I'm doing chopped up dark chocolate. This is vegan, but you can also use milk chocolate chips, white chocolate chips. Now today I'm going to do it in this tin. I just found I really liked how they all kind of like bunched together. I'm going to do 9 large ones just because we like them a little bit bigger, but if you want to do 12 smaller ones, you can. So grab a tin like this, or if you don't have a tin with sides, you can just use like a regular baking tin like that, where like a cookie tray, and put some grease and put a little bit of paper. The other thing I've prepared, I've already zested my orange, so I'm going to pop the zest in now. So that's zest of 1 whole orange, and in this jug here I've squeezed out the juice of 2 whole oranges. Now I bought regular oranges, but I think I had a blood orange mixed in there, so that's why it's a little bit darker. I find making bread quite therapeutic. I love the process and it kind of is really relaxing. But if you find it all a bit daunting, you don't have 3 hours to spare, what you can do to speed up the process is the night before, get a tray ready and measure everything out, so you're ready to go the next morning. That's what I did last night. I had everything measured out, and so then this morning it wasn't too overwhelming to get going. Sometimes I measure everything out and then I don't feel like baking that day, so then I just leave the tray there for the following day. Or if you wanted to make the dough up until after it's risen, then you can divide all your buns and pop it in the fridge and bake it the next day. The only thing you do need to keep in mind that once you remove it from the fridge, you need to get it to be room temperature before you start baking it again. Let's pour all this in and start mixing. So we've got a bubbly mixture already going in. And our aim is to knead it for about 3 to 5 minutes. I'm going to add in this orange juice. I actually like adding the pulp as well. I wasn't straining that off because I just think it adds a little bit of extra flavour. And in here I've got the oil. So I've got sunflower oil, which is about 1/4 cup and 1 tablespoon, or 75 mils. And the buns actually stay fresh for about 3 days, surprisingly, if you store them in like a sealed container. Hey Siri, set a timer for 3 minutes. So our dough's quite stretchy and sticky. I'm going to add the cranberries in now and just knead them a little bit. We've still got about a minute on our clock. If you find that your dough looks too sticky, you can add a touch more flour. In this bowl, I'm going to get it ready to pop the dough in here. I'm just going to pop a little bit of oil in here. You can use flour if you don't want to use any more oil, but I like the oil because it kind of like just creates a little bit more moisture, and I've got a bit of plastic wrap on standby. So our timer just went off. So what I will do, I'm going to add a tiny bit of flour, extra flour. So let me add an extra 1/4 cup. Dough making is all about eyeballing it, and you kind of get used to seeing what it looks like. Does that make sense? It's looking much better. I'm going to throw in my dark chocolate. It's 50 grams, or I think that's about, what's that? About 1/2 cup. I'm going to mix this just for about 20 seconds. If anyone's wondering out there, I'm not vegan. I'm probably what's called flexitarian. I do like eating a lot of plant-based food. I have a lot of viewers who, for whatever reason, they're allergic to dairy or they can't eat eggs. So I like to offer a few other recipes. I've got a recipe from last year that's not dairy-free, so if you want to pop over and look at that one, I'll pop the link up above. So now I'm going to just scrape all of my dough out into this medium-sized bowl. Now my bowl's not as clean as what I would do for bread making. Because I want to keep the buns fluffy and soft, I've let it a little bit more hydrated and a bit stickier than usual. But once it's risen, I can add a little bit of flour, extra flour to it. So I'm going to pop that on top. My kitchen's relatively warm, so I'm just going to rest it here until it doubles in size, about 45 minutes to an hour, just depending on how warm your kitchen is. So I'll pop my timer on. So our dough is lovely and risen, and the next step is we're going to pop this out onto the floured bench. I actually use a breadboard now because I find it easier. I should have put a little bit of oil on top of my dough or the plastic because it did stick a little bit. And now if you wanted to do a dozen, you can divide it into about 90 grams each into 12 balls. But I'm going to do bigger ones. I'm going to do 9. So I'm going to do it about 125 grams, and I like to weigh it on my scales just so they're all even. But if you can't be bothered or you just want to be a bit more relaxed, just do it by eye. So I'm going to pop a little bit of flour onto my dough and onto my hands. Gently tap that down a bit. Now you will find it's quite sticky, but try and get used to using a sticky dough because the result will be so much nicer than having a dry dough. Just get it into some kind of a little bit more flour shape so you can cut it. Trying to make it kind of like a sausage, but it doesn't really matter. So if I do it into 9 at 125, let me just start cutting it and just pop it on my scales. Whoops, they went off. That one's only 98. So I'm just going to keep going. I'll probably speed it up. So I'll show you how to do it. That was 129, so thereabouts. So I'm going to stretch this out. Like I do my other rolls, if you've seen my spelt bun recipe, I just stretch it. And I'm just being a little bit more gentle because there's so much fruit and chocolate in there. So you get like a tight ball until it gathers together at the base. And on a bit that hasn't got too much flour, we just roll it into a ball until it's smooth. Any big bits of fruit or chocolate, just pop them down, tap it a little bit, and then we just place it in our tray. And I don't mind if these butt up against each other. Just left a small gap, about a finger aside. I'm going to do 3 across and 3 down, so it gets to be 9. The dough's all stretched and popped into balls. I'm going to grab some plastic wrap and oil it and place it over the top and let it rest for about 30 to 45 minutes. If you pop the oil in, it just ensures that the dough doesn't stick to the plastic like what happened before. That covers it so they don't dry out. And you just do it loosely so the buns still have some room to grow. But what I like to do, just to ensure there's no air gaps, I pop a towel over the top as well. So that'll rest there for second rise. Now I need to do a clean up, and then I need to show you how to make the batter for the cross on the top. So I'm going to make my batter for my cross on top. If you can't be bothered, just leave it out. But it always looks good. So in here I'm going to add some oil, just 10 mils. And I'm almost running out, so I'll see what I've got left. I've run out of my veggie oil. I'm just going to grab some other oil. Splash of olive oil. You can use any kind of oil. Just helps the cross glide on better. And then into that, I'm going to add some water. So I've got some water in my jug here. I'm just looking at my notes, 50 mils. And flour. So we need to add in 60 grams of flour. Let's have a look. This is icing sugar, just a teaspoon of icing sugar. And a pinch of salt. And we need to get a consistency that's quite thick. And then I'm going to pour this into this is a recyclable, I've reused a piece of plastic piping bag with a small nozzle down the bottom. Just mix this until there's no lumps. That looks pretty good. Now I grab a glass and I just set the plastic or my piping bag into the glass and fold the top over. Just whatever you can kind of place it in. I just find this easier. And then we scoop all that out. And that's ready to place on top when the buns have risen. So our buns are all risen for the second time. I'm going to take the plastic off and I'm going to do the cross, but I'm going to zoom you in so you can see close up what I'm doing. It's pushed out a bit. I think I'll be okay. So grab your nozzle. And I'm just going to do the traditional one. Last year I did a diagonal one. So I'm going to just pipe this gently in a straight line. Time to bake our buns for about 20 minutes until they're golden brown. A little baking tip that I like to do when I bake bread is I pop a little ramekin of water at the base or the lower shelf. So I'll pop that in. That helps create a little bit of moisture and steam. And I'm going to bake these for 20 minutes. So while that's baking, I need to make a sugar syrup for a glaze. Now there's so many recipes out there that you can do a jam glaze, or you can do an egg wash before baking, but this is something simple that I like. It creates a bit of a sticky outside, but it's lovely and shiny. It does go a little bit dull the next day, so you can reapply it, but I'll show you what I do. So I've got some water in here, so that's 50 mils of water, 50 grams of caster sugar. So I just melt that on the stove top behind me until it reduces in size and it's a sticky glaze, and I add a little bit of vanilla. That usually takes about 5 or so minutes. My sugar's all melted and I'm just going to let this rest here until the buns are cooked, and I'm going to add a half teaspoon of vanilla just for a little bit of extra flavour. But it's important not to add the vanilla while you're boiling it because the vanilla will evaporate. And grab a pastry brush to have on standby. Our buns are all cooked and I'm a bit embarrassed to say that they've kind of morphed into this big kind of loaf because I made them so big, but they're going to taste fantastic because when they're stuck together like that, they're really moist and fluffy on the inside. So I'm going to glaze them now, and then I'll need to let them sit for about 10 minutes before I do my taste test. So I'm just going to brush this all over the top. What I should have done is move them down a little bit to give them a little bit more breathing space. But you know, sometimes things don't turn out perfectly, but the flavour is still great. And so my aim is to not always be the most perfect baker, but to show you a way of doing it. with different flours, different recipes, something creative. Okay, I'm just going to let it rest and then I'll come back and do the taste test and show you what they look like on the inside. So we're back with our very large hot cross buns, and I've buttered one and I'm just going to do a taste test. I'm going to choose the bottom part. They're so flavourful. The dark chocolate just gives it another punch of flavour. And you've got the cranberries and the hint of spice and orange. So much going on in this bun. So delicious. Let me know if you give this recipe a go. Share it with a friend, pop a comment below, and feel free to create your own version of it and let me know how you go. Don't forget, subscribe if you're new here today, and I'll pop a few other recipes for hot cross buns above. I've got one from last year and the year before. And thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye. Gonna go away and enjoy this.